Hello, we are now on 10.02 geometry, and we're going to talk today about a little reviewing of completing the square, and then we're going to use completing the square, part of it, to rewrite equations of circles into our center radius form. So let's get started with a review of completing the square from algebra. So solve the equation by completing the square. We've got 2x squared minus 24x plus 54. Step 1, rewrite all x terms on one side and also divide out the coefficient of x squared. So remember, when you're completing the square, you can only complete the square if your coefficient of x squared is a 1. So this one has a 2, so we need to divide both sides by 2. So now that leaves me with x squared minus 12x plus 27 equals 0. And then I want to rewrite all x terms on one side. So I'm going to rewrite this as x squared minus 12x, and I'm going to subtract my 27 over to the other side. So I left a blank here. Right now I'm writing it out in lots of steps because I want you guys to see every little thing we're doing and have this in your notes. But when we do it shorter, you would just write the blanks on both sides. Now we're going to find b over 2. Now I always like to say you want to find your new b. You're not a newbie at this anymore because there's two b's you might be looking at, the negative 24 and the negative 12. You want to use the negative 12. Use your new b. That's really important. So we take negative 12 divided by 2 and we square it. So you get negative 6 quantity squared, which gives us 36. So now we're going to take what we just got, this 36, and we're going to add it to both sides. So I'm going to rewrite it. X squared minus 12x plus 36 equals negative 27 plus 36. So you keep your equation balanced by adding that 36 to both sides. Now for step 4, we're going to rewrite the left-hand side as a squared binomial. So this side over here, we want to write it as a squared binomial. To get that, there's a bunch of different ways that students use. This is ideally what we're working towards, getting x plus b over 2. Now, where did b over 2 come from? Well, b over 2, it comes from this right here. So whatever it was before you squared it, that's what's going to go in there. So since it was a negative 6, it'll be x minus 6. You could also just take your b divided by 2 again. Or you could say to yourself, what multiplies to positive 36 with itself and adds to negative 12? Negative 6 times negative 6 is 36. Negative 6 minus 6 is negative 12. Then we add our like terms over here to get 9. Now we're going to take the square root of each side so that we can get rid of this squared up here and start getting into that x. So we have x minus 6 equals plus or minus. Always whenever we take the square root, got to remember your plus or minus. Square root of 9 is just 3. So now I realize this one would have been factorable using P's and C's or factoring. And then we've got to solve for x. So I'm going to add my 6 to both sides here. So I get x equals, I always like to write whatever you add over first, plus or minus 3. So now these are like terms. So it's very important you combine them. So either 6 plus 3 or 6 minus 3. So we get two answers. We get 3 and 9 x could be. So it is factorable, but I asked you to do it using completing the square. So you can use completing the square on any equation of a quadratic. So as long as it has an equal sign, then we can use it to solve it. And you can also use completing the square to put something into vertex form if you're taking a quadratic. All right, let's just practice another one here. So it'd be a good time, especially since you guys have already seen this before, pause the video, see if you can do this one on your own. This one will end up in a radical, so you want your answer in simplest radical form. And then come back and I'll run through it. All right, so first thing I would do is divide by 3 on both sides. And then I'm going to subtract over my 10. So now I'm writing it a lot shorter. I'm not going to rewrite everything out like I did on the top. Leave my blanks on both sides. I think it's Miss Locke that calls this the B box over here. So she just writes it out each time. So we take our new B, which is 8, not the 24. That's your old B. So we take 8 over 2, quantity squared, which gives me 4 squared, which is 16. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to add 16 to both sides. Rewrite my left side as a perfect squared binomial. So it's whatever it was before you squared it. So that's a positive 4. So it goes x plus 4. And negative 10 plus 16 is 6. And now we're going to take the square root of both sides. Square root of a squared is just whatever's under the radical. So x plus 4. Or whatever's being squared, I should say. And don't forget your plus or minus. There's no perfect square I can take from 6, so I'm just going to leave it as rad 6. And then lastly, I need to solve for x, so I subtract over my 4, and I get negative 4 plus or minus rad 6 for my final answer. So with questions like this, I think this is easier than doing quadratic formula, but that's only if your middle number is divisible by 2. All right, so that's just review. Now let's apply it to geometry and circles. So there's two different forms of a circle equation. First is standard form, which is what we talked about last time, and then we have expanded form. Now to get expanded form, all you would do is you're just writing out x minus h and foiling that, and then y minus k and foiling that equals your r squared. And add your like terms, and this is what you'd get. So when I make up these problems, if I know what I want the center and radius to be, I sub them in and then I FOIL it out to come up with a problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to complete the square 2 times to convert it, once for your x and once for y. Find the radius in the center of this. So I'm giving it to you in expanded form, and here are the steps over here in this box. So first thing we want to do is we want to get all constants on the right, and everything that has a variable is going to stay on the left. So I'm going to subtract over the 12 from both sides. So now I have 2x squared plus 2y squared plus 12x minus 4y equals negative 12. Now, just like with completing the square, we still cannot complete the square if we have the coefficients in the front. So when you get onto different types of conics and pre-calc, you'll have to factor it out. But for circles, since it's the same in front of both of them, we can divide both sides by that, whatever that coefficient is. So for a circle, it'll always be that they're being added together, x squared and y squared, and they always should have the same coefficient. So now I get x squared plus y squared plus 6x minus 2y equals negative 6. All right, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to group my x terms together. So x squared plus 6x, and I'm going to leave my blank, plus, now I'm going to take the y's and group them, y squared minus 2y equals negative 6. So again, we're going to complete the square twice. So we have our b over 2 quantity squared. We're going to do a b box for the x and a b box for the y's. So for the x, I'm going to take my b right here, again, the new b, not the 12, but the 6. And 6 over 2 quantity squared, 3 squared is 9. And I'm going to do the x's completely first, and then we'll come back to the y's. So now I'm going to add 9 here, but since I added it to the left side, I need to add it to the right side. Now let's do the y's. So we're going to take our new b, which is negative 2 over 2 quantity squared. That gives me negative 1 quantity squared. Make sure that negative 1 is in parentheses. That's really important. And that gives me positive 1. So now I'm going to add a 1 here, and I'm going to add a 1 over here. Next up, I'm going to take each set of parentheses and rewrite it as a perfect squared binomial. So again, this is my x set right here. So I want to take whatever it was before I squared it. So it's going to be plus 3. Plus, here we're going to take whatever it was before we squared it. So that's going to be a y minus 1 quantity squared. And then over here, we're just going to combine our like terms. So we get 3 plus 1 is 4. And now you have your standard form of a circle right here. So to find our center, we just take our opposite signs like we did last class. So this would be negative 3, and the y coordinate would be positive 1. And then your radius, recall you want to take the square root of what it's equal to. So the square root of 4 is 2. So those would be your center and your radius of that. So if you're given it in expanded form, you want to first convert it into your standard form and then find your center and your radius. Okay, we'll do a couple more of these together, but if you're kind of getting the hang of it, you can pause it. The next one will be a little bit shorter, but it's a little bit different since the equation is actually shorter. So we're going to start the same way. I'm looking for any constants. I don't have any, so I'm going to leave that. I'm also looking for any coefficients in front of x squared and y squared, and they are both a 1, so I don't need to divide by anything. So the first thing I'm going to do is just group my x terms and group my y's. Well, there's no other y's here, so there's nothing to group. So I'm just going to leave it just my x's. Now I'm going to do my b box over here for the x's. So I take my x value, my b, which is 4, and that's 2 squared, which is 4. So now I'm going to take plus 4, add it to the left, which means I have to add it to the right to keep the equation balanced. Now I'm going to take my trinomial right here, rewrite it as a perfect squared binomial. It's whatever it was before I squared it, so that's a positive 2. 0 plus 4, combine those like terms to get 4. And now that is your standard form right here. So now I can go right to finding my center and my radius. So for my center, I take the opposite sign with the x and the opposite sign with the y. Now there's nothing being added or subtracted to the y, so that's a 0. If it was a 1, then it would be y minus 1 quantity squared. And then your radius, you're going to take the square root of whatever it said equal to, because it's equal to r squared, and that's 2 again. Okay, and we're going to do one more of these. So at this point, you should start to be feeling like a pro. Pause the video and give it a try on your own, and then we will, I'll run through it together. All right, so first, hopefully you divided by 4 on both sides. We get x squared. And actually, I'm going to do a couple things at once here. I'm going to rearrange. And since I already divided by 4, since you guys already did this, hopefully it's easier to follow along. So minus 10x. And then I got y squared minus 6y. And then I would have negative 33 over here. Okay. And next, we want to complete the square. Oh, and also over here, you should have combined your like terms. So negative 147 and added your 15 over to that side. Would have gotten you the negative 33. I didn't show that. So make sure you have that as well. Okay, or if you divided both of them by 4 first and then added, that's fine too. All right, so now we'll take negative 10, put it in for our b. We get negative 5, make sure that's in parentheses. And we're going to add that here, which means we have to add it to the other side. And then we're going to do it for the y's. So this was for your x's. This is for your y's. Our yb is negative 6 divided by 2. That gives us negative 3. Make sure that's in parentheses. We get 9. Add 9 here. Add 9 here. Now we're going to write it as a perfect squared binomial, whatever it was before we squared it, negative 5. Whatever y was before we squared it, negative 3. Combine our like terms over here, and that gives us positive 1. So this is our standard form. Our center, we take the opposite sign of x, opposite sign of y, would be 5, 3. Radius, square root of 1, is just 1. And that would be your final answer. Okay, so again, make sure that you combine these two together. So you could have done that either first and then you wouldn't have any fractions or decimals. or you could do it after you divide by the 4. It doesn't matter. And then always make sure you complete the square for both your x and your y. And this is probably the most common mistake, is people forget to add these terms over to the other side. So make sure you remember to do that. Center, you take the opposite signs, and radius, you take the square root of whatever it was equal to. All right, hopefully this makes sense to you guys. And I hope you're all doing well. I miss you guys. Bye out.